Hey Dakota, we on 2026 first episode of the year. I almost did one day one. For fans of the program, I'm going to give some housekeeping right at the top. Dakota's not going to be here with us for about a month. This is going to be his last episode, not ever, but he's going to be gone for a while. He's going away to work, and we respect that. And is what it is. But let's enjoy this kind of concise 1 hour podcast that we're going to have this week.
Well, yes, what Lukie says is true. I will be returning to the show for our episode February 8th. It'll be the second episode of February. So it'll be about 4 episodes that I'm gone. And I know that Lukie has some bang up guest hosts coming in that by the time I get back, you might be like, we got this fucking guy again. So I hope you guys have a great month in boxing without me. And I look forward to coming back next month.
Yeah. So I think that for me personally, it's going to be fun, right? I know everyone's like, we're tuning in for a boxing show. Why are you giving us housekeeping? But there is a level of a fun for me because I have to program a show for a month, and there could be a chance that I'm just sitting in a dark room by myself and talking boxing, which I've done for many years. But
we know all about that.
Yeah, I mean, there were years where like every week I was finding a host until I found Dakota, which I think this is a good segue to start with. So I found Dakota through an Aaron Coley interview, someone that I've been in the gyms with. And he just handled the interview with care and just kind of a level of, he basically just asked interesting stuff. So I'm like, I need to do something with this guy. I think I reached out to you, and within a month or so, I'm like, this is my guy. So whenever you go on these little conquests or like people are away from the show, it's a great opportunity to reset, start of the year. So I guess the one hard thing about doing things like this is rejection. Like you get your ego up and you're like, oh yeah, I'm somebody. And then like inevitably you get rejected or someone treats you like crap and you just feel so stupid, or you can feel dumb. So I think that's the only downside for me is like the trying not to get my feelings hurt if someone's busy, but
listen, maybe people don't know this about me, but before anybody gave me a chance, I did 36 episodes of the Slip and Weave podcast talking to myself alone in a room during the COVID-19 pandemic. So both Lukie and I are well equipped to talk about boxing alone in a room. And it's always a pleasure to not have to do it alone, to do it together every week, to be able to bounce ideas off of you. And thanks to guys like Brandon Gonzalez and Otis Griffin and Aaron Coley and various other guys from Lukie's area, I was introduced to Lukie, and we've been doing this show together for years now, and we will continue to do this show.
Amanda Serrano, performance, what'd you think?
I was really trying to figure out, like, what are my expectations of this fight for Serrano? I don't know terribly much about Tellez, and all the credit in the world to her to taking a last-minute fight, on roughly 2 weeks' notice against a generational talent and really being game every single round, looking like the young, hungry fighter that she was, and just not even really being close to on the level still. I mean, for whatever decline there may be in Amanda Serrano's game, especially at 126 pounds, Lukie, she's just still so formidable. And though she has never been a defensive wizard, she gets hit a little more than she used to. But I'm watching it and I'm like, well, God damn it, it's still Amanda Serrano. And the longevity with which she's been able to continue to perform at this high a level, albeit maybe she's on the downside of what you would call a prime. She is still a formidable top pound for pound fighter in her sport. She continues to be one of the hardest punchers in women's boxing. And it's tough for me to criticize a performance like that from a champion who's now, 50-something fights into their career.
So to me, it was the classic, let's just appreciate Amanda Serrano while she's here. Interesting career.
She's still here?
She's still here. And it's like, this is a fight that could have been canceled. This is a fight that could have not happened. She wanted that Puerto Rico fight with MVP. And, people criticize Jake Paul, but Jake Paul really made Amanda Serrano more relevant than any other promoter had before. Serrano had accolades, but she was kind of like a hidden gem secret type fighter. And over the past couple of years, she's really gotten the treatment that she deserves. She's gotten thrust into the spotlight, a Puerto Rican boxing icon. And we've gotten to see more of her personality on bigger stages. To me, I couldn't help but compare and contrast it to the 2021 performance when she fought on Ring City, USA in Puerto Rico. And you have to appreciate Serrano for still being there, and she's still one of the best. But it's clear that this is not like the prime Serrano. And age will tell you that, but it's also like the damage is adding up, And to me, I made a video last night, and it's like when you start to see like cuts and swelling over eyes consistently, I mean, the cuts and the swelling, I think, are going to be the story of this final part of her career. Tellez, very good fighter. I think there's a chance she wins a world title, but at the same time, she was a bit green for this level of opposition, and she got that eye to the point where I almost thought that there was a chance that the eye could have shut at one point in this fight. And to me, it makes me feel as though at a certain world-class level, every fight's going to be hard for Serrano at this point moving forward, because she's not going to be the fastest of feet. She's got a little bit of damage on her face. And though she has power, part of the power thing is you got to deliver the power, and she's not able to deliver it in the same ways. But she's one of these Manny Pacquiao-like figures where she moved up and down so many different weight classes. I think we take for granted where she's at this point in her career because of the extraordinary achievements she's had.
Right. And I also, again, we talk about longevity and number of fights that a fighter has in their career, especially in women's boxing. We just don't have that precedent as much in this generation where women's boxing is elevated so much to see a fighter still performing at a certain level 50 fights in. I think you're absolutely right that she is past her prime, but to still see a 37-year-old Amanda Serrano get her 48th win, do it cleanly against an unbeaten young fighter who clearly has some ability, I think is still impressive to me.
Well, I think there's also I'm looking up her Wikipedia right now, and it's like she wins a fight. Basically, she wins her first title in 2011. Stops Kimberly Connor, super featherweight title, IBF, right? Wins a bunch of belts, okay? And then in 2018, she's going to be an MMA fighter. Like, that's another interesting thing about Serrano is like, she was not a part of like this women's boxing is really well respected. Like, people might look at the end result of like the attention she's getting, but there was a time where like she was truly looking, I think it was called Combates Americas or something of that nature. And it was an MMA promotion, and she had a few fights, I want to say, and started her career with a draw in that promotion. And it felt like her and Heather Hardy were kind of looking at ways to find bigger paydays outside of boxing because they'd kind of hit a ceiling. And then she gets the Katie Taylor fight when she linked up with Jake Paul. And then that kind of ushers in the new era of women's boxing. That was what I feel is like the true first women's boxing super fight that was treated as a super fight. It wasn't a spectacle. It was, and then you looked and you saw all these different young up and comers. I'd be curious if Reina Tellez went to that fight. It felt like all the good women's boxers, all the up and comers traveled to that fight to support. And really, since that fight, women's boxing has changed. That fight is really a moment in history where I think the gravity of the way people look at a women's boxing bout changed, because that was on a stage at Madison Square Garden. It was the best fight of the year. Only kind of like, old school people would be like, you can't have a women's fight be the best fight of the year. And I think that makes it interesting to me, is that a lot of people, parts of her career are still unfamiliar with them despite her fame and notoriety.
Right. And maybe they caught her kind of, after her absolute pinnacle. I remember some of those early knockouts that she would get in the HBO days, and maybe I'm misremembering it, but it felt like she was on some undercards. If it was Cotto undercards or, Juanma Lopez, she was on the undercards of notable Puerto Rican fighters of the time getting devastating knockouts. And I don't know that the same audience was seeing her in that moment. But it took a dance partner like Katie Taylor, to kind of put the whole sport on its back to some extent and create a rivalry that is now a Barrera Morales. It's a Chocolatito Juan Francisco Estrada. It goes with the lineage of great rivalries.
It's just a great fight, right? It's a historic fight that changed the landscape of boxing, which is what we want with all rivalries, right? We want great fights. Back to this fight, Reina Tellez took the fight on short notice, comes in overweight, not by much, but I mean, I wouldn't justify it, but that can happen. Obviously, when you're a late sub, and then minor details, it's the holiday season. I definitely have gained some weight over the holidays. It can happen, right? You can miscalculate things, miss the weight. Tough to kind of gauge this Serrano performance too, because I think most people looked at the inexperience of Tellez as a professional boxer and expected a stoppage. And I kind of feel like if someone is at a world-class level with a good amateur pedigree, this version of Serrano is going to have trouble with them if they can take the power to a certain extent, because the legs are kind of an issue for her at this point, in my opinion. She was having trouble cutting off the rings. She's going to win the fight with volume in her shots, but it's going to be hard for her to kind of
And she does still have that Pacquiao thing, right, where she's able to close range at weird times that you're not really expecting. So it's like she's not on you, and then she's right in range to throw a combination. It's in bursts, but she still does have a weird way of kind of closing that distance very quickly when she sets her
Wily veteran stuff. Veteran stuff. So it's like you almost feel like you're safe, and she can do a shoulder roll or slip a punch, and now she's in perfect range for a punch. It's just what great fighters do, right? But it just feels like when you're a wily veteran, she's almost in her Bernard Hopkins phase, but she fights different where she's...
Well, I was thinking of a historical, a contextual comparison, and there's elements of this fight that reminded me of when Manny Pacquiao beat Jesse Vargas, because Vargas was a younger fighter. It was a relatively competitive fight that Pacquiao won very clearly. But if you were looking for the Manny Pacquiao that knocked out Miguel Cotto and Oscar De La Hoya, that wasn't what you got. But what you still got was the most talented guy in the room. And it still feels like Serrano kind of occupies that space.
Yeah, she's the most relevant. And then Tellez, to me, I feel like her deep amateur pedigree was really her bread and butter in this fight, was the fact that she had that amateur pedigree. So it felt like she didn't make the fight easy, because when she felt like, there was a chance something could go wrong, she had this ability to kind of survive, for lack of better words. She knew how to...
She might have won a round or two.
Well, she was winning rounds, and I part of me was almost wondering, like, if she threw more right hands, which easier said than done, would Serrano's eye fully close? And the answer probably is no, because she has Mike Basil in her corner. And when you have a good, competent cut man, it's probably not going to happen. But that being said, it's interesting, right? Because Tellez has this experience. There's a chance that she'll be a champion. She'll for sure fight in another title fight. She's a good fighter. But I also think that the story for me coming in was the damage on the face of Serrano. And I think leaving, that's the story, is that, there's damage that's accumulating, and I think it's kind of falling under the radar.
Well, there's no, like I said, there isn't a precedent, both good and bad, for a women's fighter lasting this long and having this many fights at such a high level. And it is tough to watch a great fighter like that still be taking punishment, even in dominant wins at this point in their careers.
How much longer do you think we get Serrano?
I don't know. I think there's probably a big fight or two left in her. Just based on what I saw, I still see somebody who can put punches together and land hard body shots and slow fighters down. So I still think that there's some actual tangible ability. I would not be surprised if we saw Amanda Serrano fight for another 3 years.
So I'm thinking it's 2 to 3 fights. That's what I think from this. So I think we're on the same path. She's not going to probably be the most active fighter at this point. Co-feature, Stephanie Hahn beats Holly Holm. Fight was a rough hang. Hahn wins. It was clunky. Holm's range is just kind of, it's obvious she did in other sports, basically. Like, it's obvious that, she's been away. Hahn still is kind of, she's from a fighting family. She's a good fighter herself, but there's nothing. She's like the definition of a world champion who doesn't really have a spectacular trait.
It's like she's like Mario. She's like Mario Barrios, where it's like there isn't this big gaping like thing that I could pick at with her game. But what she is she's really competent. And I think that in terms of this matchup with Holm, she just kind of knew the moments to hold her feet. She knew the moments to kind of pull out of range and make Holm miss and make her reach and put her out of position. She just kind of knew how to do some of the basics and when to do them. And at times it felt like you said, Holly Holm's clearly been in another sport for the last 15 years or so. And there's elements of getting herself into punching range in a boxing ring that she just doesn't look quite comfortable with at this world level. And Han was able to exploit that, in my view, won at least 5 or 6 rounds of the fight and won very clearly.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange fight. I get Holly Holm's a big name and an influential figure in fighting, but there was intrigue, right? Because Holly Holm's a Hall of Famer and in her 40s. Can she win a belt? But once it was like 2 rounds in, it was pretty clear she wasn't winning. And it just kind of made me wonder, why is this so high on the card? We had earlier in the night Yankiel Rivera versus Jonathan La Bomba Gonzalez, I felt stole the show for the evening. And this is kind of the weird paradox of boxing that we don't see in other sports, where in other sports, you might see, famous athlete pick like LeBron James. Well, the score and the record dictate where they sit at a certain point. They don't always get the Christmas game. They don't get the playoff game. Yeah. But in boxing, it's like we are, I don't know what it is, so eager for viewership or whatever. Sometimes it feels as though like a novelty bout will sneak high up there because it feels like it has global reach.
I think I got to defend them a little bit more than that, because there's so many actual novelty bouts that to call, like a world title fight with an ex-MMA champion, albeit, but somebody who had a 30-something boxing, career prior to that legendary MMA career, which I don't know much about, but I do know that she knocked out Ronda Rousey. She's probably one of the more successful two-sport athletes that you could think
probably
of.
The best one, if we're going to be honest. She's probably the best one.
So I do think that the significance of that, even if what Holly was able to deliver in the ring wasn't able to match that, it did kind of look like she was quicker to the draw that first round and a half. And I thought, okay, she doesn't have the same foundation, but she's got a little bit of a quicker trigger maybe than Han. But Han just made that adjustment. She's younger. She's been only doing boxing. She's got a good foundation, and I think pretty cleanly won the fight.
Comes from a fighting family. I think it's also revisionist Lukie, like seeing the fight, kind of being excited how it would look out, and it was like younger fighter who's more experienced at boxing at this point, kind of schooling the older fighter who you could see legendary aspects, but you could also see they were in their mid-40s. And they had taken time away from boxing, and it was and I think the thing about Holm is like, I really like the competitor in her. You could see that she wanted to win and the competitive nature. Also, the fight was stopped on a head clash, goes to the scores. Han wins pretty easily, but now Han has a cut. I feel like that's the theme of this show, is the cuts. That's probably going to be a story in another fight, right? Because it's like this big cut that probably won't just go away. It's probably going to, accrue damage in other fights, and it'll be a story there. But I did feel after a couple of rounds, we saw the writing on the wall. And I think that maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm being harsh, because there was a level of intrigue where I'm like, I want to see how this is. And then the minute I saw how it was going, I'm like, I know how this is going. So I guess maybe there is that. And I think that's the danger you run when you put, older fighters in championship bouts. I think the danger you get with Erislandy Lara at this point too, at times, is you could have just a weird fight where, it's not normal that people fight in their 40s.
Yeah. And it's very mixed result. And I think just the fact that she's still able to do it and not get dominated at a world-class level is still impressive and worth noting.
Yeah, in a weird way, Han wins, but it's more impressive in many ways what Holm did. even in a loss. And I think that Han, I believe this was her second title defense of the WBA lightweight title, is probably still going to be like not regarded super highly compared to the other champions, Elif Noor Turhan, Caroline Dubois. Do you know the other one off the top of your head? I'm not sure. But I just feel like she's probably going to be the one that's not as regarded as highly as those fighters. And yet, she's doing what we always ask fighters to do, which is just sit there, make title defenses and rack up wins, right? When people say you're not a notable name, what's the best way to become a notable name? Make title defenses. Get a title, make defenses. At a certain point, people are going to respect it.
And maybe it helps too if you beat a name that's bigger than your own, which is what she did.
Couldn't hurt. Next fight I want to talk about, obviously Crystal Rosado gets a bounce back win. It was a fine performance. It didn't wow me. I'm not sure if you wanted to touch on it. It was literally, to me, was a bounce back win after losing to Sharetta Metcalf, friend of the program. She's pretty. The thing about Rosado that I noticed, and I saw this in film study, I'm like, I don't want to talk about it, and then I talk about it. She is very tense. And I think that her evolution as a fighter, she needs to kind of let the shots fly a little bit more. Seems like she's looking to load up and land a meaningful blow that changes the fight. I think her evolution as a championship fighter will be to kind of let some shots have different speeds. It feels like right now it's all one speed. It's all a very hard, fast pace. And this fighter that she was fighting couldn't really clock in on that. But the fight I really want to talk about was kind of a person that we.
I got to say one thing about Rosado very quickly is I felt like she actually did a better job in this fight of letting her combinations flow a little more. And that was ultimately, what Walters, I think, kind of struggled with was Rosado, I think, identified her range better. And I agree with the one speed thing, but it did feel a little bit more fluid.
Guy Martin Mulligan in the chat. Always love listening to Lukie and Dakota talk boxing. Thank you, man, bro. Our guy, bro. Leave comments in the chat. We'll get to him eventually. It's the first day of the year. Alexis Araiza, I think I said it right, beats former world champion Ebanie Bridges. I love stuff like this, and I'll tell you why. And I think that, also, I have some strong opinions on this fight, and I don't think you know where I'm going. What are your thoughts? Why don't you go first? Because I think I have some strong opinions, and I think I'm going to surprise people.
Listen, I didn't know anything about Araiza. I see a relatively pedestrian 3-2-1 record, but a lot of times fighters without big names, don't have the luxury of picking and choosing, and so you can't really judge a book by their cover, especially in women's boxing, on a record. But she was just so sharp early in finding her range and landing to the body, never really giving Ebanie a chance to set her feet. And even in that last 2 or 3 rounds where Ebanie finally started to make a push, it just wasn't enough. And Araiza's clean punching, solid counter punching, and continuous body attack, I just kind of kept Bridges coming in second place, at least for me.
So for me, I was impressed with both, right? Because Alexis, there's a level of mental toughness, and I always talk about this, but when you come in, you're probably coming in as the underdog, right? You're fighting someone who has a notable name and stuff. And to hold a camp and have the self-belief you can win a fight. And then the way that she won the fight was based so much off of discipline and not deviating from a game plan.
Right. It was a skillful win.
It was a skillful win, but it's like an emotional moment. So it's a moment when it's happening. You're probably thinking, oh my God, this is going great. And that positive enthusiasm could actually dissuade you. It could harm you. It could get you in trouble, Dakota, right? Because you could be like, man, I'm doing so good. So for me, it was impressive to see the mental side for her on a lot of different ways. The way she approached the fight, the way she stayed composed. And for Bridges, it's like, okay, she loses to Maya Yoshida. She has a child. She comes back. And I thought that, even though she's probably not the same fighter, right? And I think that because she marketed herself and got her name out there, I think people are always going to criticize her, but I always have a level of respect for her because she really developed a persona from 2019. She was an obscure fighter who really became a cultural phenomenon during this uprising of women's boxing. She comes back, and I think what made her a unique fighter, besides kind of the sex appeal, was relentless pressure. She had this.
Did it by winning too, Lukie. I mean, I think that's important to note.
Well, but what I'm saying is, like, she won fights, but what no one ever gave her credit for was she had this incredible work ethic, both in the ring and outside of the ring. She was a work person. She worked really hard, and she beat a lot of fighters that were more talented than her on paper because she could force a pace, she could throw punches, and she could outwork people. She just worked hard. And it seemed in this fight, I don't know if it's ring rust or, having a child, body changing, or life, that same go just isn't there. And I think it's unrealistic to expect that level from a fighter, because that's a wear down style. When you're always coming forward, when you're always aggressive, when it's all based on work ethic, bodies age. And maybe that she's just hit a point. And I didn't love seeing people kind of crap on Ebanie Bridges because of this, because I thought Alexis Araiza fought a great fight. And, Bridges didn't do bad. She just ran into someone who fought the perfect fight. And what was impressive to me about Bridges, what you said, was she kept trying to make adjustments.
I thought she won a round or two down the stretch there.
But that's speaking to what I'm saying is she didn't check out. She didn't say, oh, okay, I'm bye, I'm done.
So, Lukie, how much of that did you see as age, and how much of it did you see as what they had no issue talking about being nervous energy?
I mean, to me, I just think
you know what that looks like in the gym, right? Or you even know what
I know what nervous energy looks like.
You get a little nervous and you have a hard time pulling the trigger.
Maybe, but I mean, I think that to me, what it just looked like was it was like life has changed. Like her life changed, her motivations changed, and she's been in a lot of hard fights, and she'd been out of the ring. And, timing, ring rust is a thing, right? So timing's tough. Maybe that's what they're speaking to on the nervous energy. But then also, that physical style wears you out. So I think that there's also a part of, as you age, you can't do things the same way, and you have to kind of reinvent yourself. And I think that part of what I was seeing was Bridges was trying to reinvent herself. She was trying to do some new things, but she wasn't able to do some of the same things she was able to do when she had been in the ring prior. I don't know. What do you think?
I definitely agree. I didn't see the snap on her shots. There was just a certain level of explosivity that you have to have, especially if you fight in that style. And it didn't feel like, even in her best attempt to get on the inside and rough Araiza up a little bit, it just wasn't enough, and it didn't really work. And I don't know if another go at it where there is less nervous energy, I'm sure she'll give it one more try, and she's definitely earned that.
Yeah, I mean, who knows?
But I also think about the fighter that we saw fight Shannon Courtney. Even I'm pretty sure she lost that fight, and there was other fights through the years where when she let her hands go, you could see it had an impact, and I didn't see that part.
Yeah, and I think that Shannon Courtney just signed with MVP, and there's some animosity there. So even if she still wants to do a fight, I think that's still a good little rivalry fight. And if she has that in her still, a rival that gets her angry would probably bring that out of her. So like, that's still a fight,
Sure.
Okay, now we're going over to my fight of the night. Jonathan La Bomba Gonzalez schools Yankiel Rivera. Couple of takes. Yankiel Rivera, really cautionary, man. There were times in 2024 where I thought this guy was like the future of this division. And then against Angelina Cordova, there was a lot of immaturity, in my opinion, a lot of just brawling, headhunting. And then that lackluster performance carried over into this fight, where he basically brought the same game plan of, I'm going to out-tough you. And La Bomba Gonzalez was completely prepared for it and boxed him, dropped him, and just knew what to do with him. And it just looked like Rivera's hitting a ceiling. He's hitting a ceiling where he can't freestyle fights at this level. Whereas La Bomba Gonzalez, to be perfectly honest with you, I start to wonder, is he a Hall of Fame trajectory fighter? Because this is what those great fighters do, is that when they resurrect a career against a young fighter, they're towards the end, they're a former champion. And here he is, takes on a guy that on paper, undefeated, up-and-comer, and absolutely outclasses him and derails the trajectory of this fighter's career.
It's an incredibly impressive win, especially coming off of a first-round knockout loss. I will say, unfortunately, I didn't see the prelims on this, and I was actually surprised to see that this wasn't going to be a part of the main card. So, unfortunately, I did miss it. But when I saw on paper that Bomba was coming off the kind of loss that he did, even though Rivera, the Cordova performance was so shaky, I just still sort of expected that he'd be like younger, fresher, and just have a little more in the tank. And he didn't.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a really patient, composed performance by Gonzalez. And sometimes, like, these guys that are great fighters can slow a fight down and make boxing into a game. And he just would go backwards. He went ring rope to ring rope. He went all four corners, like an old school Southern pro wrestling match where they had the strap match and you had to touch all four sides of the ring. And you'd walk into the corner and Rivera would charge in and you'd catch him with some shots, turn, pivot out, go to the next corner. And it was like very much like he was playing Punch Out. Like he just did the same patterns, composed. And I mean, it's, to me, the cautionary thing about Rivera is it's starting to look like there's a level of like he wants to exchange and punch with everybody. And that's just not a great long-term style. Especially,
yeah, it looked like against like Dominguez, I remember he mixed in the boxing. So it looked like, okay, he's got that. So when it's time to go to that, he'll go to it. And now, again, the Cordova fight, that's when he needed to go to it, and he just didn't. And I think we learned something about, you know, who he is as a fighter that night. Where that fucking win's going to age beautiful for Olascagua, right?
Yeah, I mean, but then if you go back and watch it, it's a strange stoppage because it's like, go back and watch it. It's a weird one, but Anthony's a really good fighter. We should try to get him on the show. Maybe he'll be a guest next week for all that we know. Any other undercard stuff that you want to talk about from this card?
I didn't see the prelims, buddy.
Watched like 8 to 9 hours of boxing and then watched the Niners lose. So I was Mr. TV guy yesterday. Yeah, I know. Real saint over here. Let's talk about
almost 4 hours of boxing and I didn't even come close to you.
Yeah, that's right. Let's talk about Subriel Matias versus Dalton Smith. Very exciting fight. What are your thoughts on this bout?
I think it's very much a crossroads fight in the sense that it's two guys that we're kind of trying to figure out where they are. Dalton Smith looked so, I would say, sensational when he knocked out Zepeda, and he hasn't really built on that. And this is now kind of the big fight that we were expecting to follow that Zepeda win. And I'm just interested to see how he deals with the physicality, the punching power. Are there certain intangibles that the skills he's shown, are those going to hold up under a certain level of physicality and punching power? And for Matias, listen, I think even though he was able to beat Puello, there's just, at least for me, I'm still not sure if he's the same guy from before the Liam Paro fight. I think a dominant win over Dalton Smith would mean that he is, and then we're just watching a dominant champion in his prime that had a loss, as many great fighters do. And I think their styles are so different. It's a compelling, interesting matchup for me to see how it will play out in the ring between them.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, to me, I'll do the breakdown. Dalton Smith has the style to beat Matisse. I think there's two things to question in this fight. Hit the nail on the head. Since the Paro fight, Matisse hasn't seemed like the same guy. And we don't know why. We don't know why that it doesn't, like against Puello. I think that was a 50-50 fight. And I think a lot of people are wondering, like, did he hit that moment where he's not the same guy? You know, is he taking too much damage? Is he no longer that same come forward fighter? The question with Dalton Smith for me is, does he have enough volume? Can he throw enough punches to keep Matisse off of him? Right? Because that's kind of what Paro did, was angles and volume. If you throw enough punches, Matisse just walks forward, but he doesn't really have any he turns into Arthur Abraham. If you're turning him and throwing punches, he will just move and walk, and he'll try, but he's very content to just follow you and wait for you to slow down. So I think the most fascinating thing is what you said, and that's why we do a podcast together, is rarely do you get a world title fight that's a crossroads fight, but it truly is a crossroads fight. The champion here, we have no idea where he's at in his career. And Dalton Smith at this point, how old is Dalton Smith? He's 28. He turned pro in 2019. It's his first chance to win a world title. And he's been kind of out of sight, out of mind, I think, because he's held this number one position with the WBC for a while. So he didn't want to give up his title shot, but the give in that is we haven't seen him fight since April, and they've been very much regional British fights. So unless you're a hardcore British fight fan, you're very unfamiliar with Dalton Smith unless you saw the Jose Zepeda win.
Which, again, was a sensational win, and I think would have been a great moment to capitalize on, and they just didn't. And now that moment is coming probably a year or more later than you would have expected it to. But he's in the big leagues now, and a win over Subriel Matias makes him one of the best fighters at 140 pounds.
Okay, so the Rambler said, who's taking Dalton Smith? Our guy, Bipolar Boxing Picks, said, afternoon, y'all. I think Subriel smothers Dalton's work and will win by decision. Dakota, this one's a good enough fight, an on-the-fence fight, where I think people actually want our opinions on this fight. What are you thinking?
I personally think that Dalton Smith is going to have the legs to keep Subriel Matias turning. I think it's very possible that he's going to have some rough moments. I think you might see Dalton Smith hit the canvas. But I do think all in that he's just going to be able to bring a few more tools to the table, and that Matias will try. He will land some clean body shots. He will make Dalton Smith uncomfortable, but he's just not going to be able to pull the trigger quite enough. That's what my gut's telling me.
My gut so far, and let's look at my guy, Willie Anderson. He said, I think Smith isn't ready for a step up at all, even if Matisse might be on the decline. Rambler said, you don't think Dalton can copy Paro's blueprint? Throws out there. My feeling is this is like a split decision, majority decision fight. And if you really wanted my hot take, I think it's going to end in a draw. Like, I feel like this is like the fight where it's possibly going to be the fight of two halves. Dalton starts strong. Matisse comes on late. Maybe there's a droppage. I kind of see this fight as like Badu Jack versus Adonis Stevenson, even though the styles are different, where it's just two different fights at two different points. If I had to pick a fighter, I like where Dalton Smith is at in his career more than Subriel Matias. Really kind of strange fight. Also,
and Dalton Smith has also taken almost like no serious punishment in his career. And I do think you have to factor that in.
But then there's also like, okay, Smith is taking a huge leap up in competition, and then the damage component with Matisse. It's a strange fight. It's a strange one because it's like one could almost say this is like a huge leap in competition for Dalton Smith, because the version of Zepeda he fought was Zepeda at the end of his career. Still a good fighter, but end of his career. And then Matisse is like basically had hard fights for 6 or 7 years. Like every fight he's in, he takes some damage. So I wouldn't be shocked at any outcome, because there could, like, it's just going to be when we see it. What do you think of the idea that this is taking place at the Barclays Center on ppv.com?
I mean, that's so boxing in 2025, well, now in 2026, that major American promoters that are putting on fights at big venues, like, we're just going to randomwebsite.net to watch these fights. I think that it's very off-putting generally to have to go to a service that I'm unfamiliar with or that I'm not already paying for, like a DAZN or an ESPN. I think it's not good, bro. I think it's very indicative of where we're at. I mean, do we even know where Xander Zayas versus Abbas Barreo is going to be streamed?
Not yet. I would Yeah, we don't have any idea. But I'm glad the fight is being streamed, first and foremost. Subriel Matias-Dalton Smith is a worthy fight. And at this point, it seems like we're getting to the dark ages of 2013 where there were great fights that just weren't seen unless they got uploaded to YouTube. They just happened and you had to read someone's report. So I'm glad that it's visible, but it definitely is going to hamper motivations for people because for American listeners, there's NFL playoff games. So you're competing with, the first week of NFL playoff games, a fantastic product, lots of promotion, team, good matchups, interesting stuff. So,
but this is also this is the kind of matchup that typically would not have had that problem, especially in a world where we get Pro Box live streamed on YouTube and we get Boxing Insider shows from Sony Hall that I'm at, on the Zone. So it's just it is an odd.
Who knows? We're not a business show, so we're here to talk about the fights. The undercard now, it has some decent undercard fights. I don't know how familiar you are with this undercard. How familiar are you with the undercard, Dakota?
I would say not particularly.
Not at all. Okay. So there's some Dakota and Lukie banger fights on this card, I think. Alfredo Santiago, do you remember him? He's kind of on a good run. Yeah. He's beaten Carl Dargan and stuff. He's taken on Henri Cedeno, undefeated fighter. I think that's a good one. Santiago to me is kind of like an octopus, long reach, awkward. Cedeno's one of these top prospects, up and comer, but at the same time, relatively untested. It's a good, interesting fight because I think most people look at Cedeno as a power puncher. Most people look at Santiago as someone that can kind of slow down and make fights awkward. So I think that the stylistic clash sets a trajectory for both guys.
That's a really good matchup. And again, another reason why it would be beautiful if this fight was maybe a little bit more accessible to the fans.
Fight of the year type fight right here. I'm going to give it to you. Nestor Bravo versus Pedro Campa. It's definitely like one of those fights that's just under the radar, might not mean much to the world championship scene. Maybe a guy fights for a title in the future, but it really feels like a real good...
that's a good fight for the 15 spot.
Yeah, but it's like a good... Here are two guys that you know what they're going to do. They're going to come forward. They're going to punch. They have some limitations, but their limitations might make a good fan-friendly fight. That's a sneaky fight of the year type fight, or it could be a quick knockout for one of the guys, depending on if someone lands and the other guy doesn't like it. Guy that I'm really excited about, bantamweight, former champion, Emmanuel Rodriguez, returns after losing his belt. He's been out for a while.
Who did he lose to?
Nishida.
Right.
He lost to Nishida, but I've always found him a fascinating character because he's one of the guys that I really rated highly. And when Inoue beat him so quickly, that was like one of those big, big moments for me that Inoue was a real capital G dude. And I just think that it's fascinating that he's coming back to this division when the division is changing again. So it's almost like he's been in three eras of the division. He's in the Inoue division, the Nakatani era, and now he's coming back and maybe he can be a 3-division world champion. But to me, in terms of talent, he's probably the most talented guy on the card.
Man, has he taken on a who's who of his era.
I mean, he's and it's kind of like the shame of the lightweight, but not shame. They just fight everybody. So it's like
he's like a Carlos Cuadras. He's one of those guys. He's been in the mix for years. And it is pretty incredible how he retools after losses, frankly. Yeah, and
he more than likely will probably be in another title fight by the end of the year or the start of next year. Phenomenal fighter. So that the matchup doesn't really move the needle for me per se, but the fact that he's on the card, I think is fascinating. Now let's go over to the Dakota special. Dakota needs to talk about this or else he'd be unhappy. Your guy, Kabayel, is taking on Damian Knyba. It's a shame you can't break it down next week because this feels like a Dakota special.
I really like this matchup. Again, my personal belief is that Agit Kabayel is undeniably the number 2 heavyweight in the world. Unless it's Usyk, I'm kind of a little disappointed. Unless it's Fabio Wardley, I'm a little disappointed. So I think that Knyba is a a great rival, but he's a relatively untested, inexperienced, undefeated prospect. Like, he just sort of passed the obligatory Joey DeWayco test at the Garden a couple of months ago, and he did a great job with it. But I think ultimately there's still certain kinds of fights that I would have liked to have seen from Knyba before this matchup. I just think Kabayel is going to be too physical, too much of a body puncher, too much volume. But it's a great matchup, and I'd rather see Agit Kabayel take on 6'8" Damian Knyba than not be active.
I also think that there's like an interesting visual to this fight, because Kabayel is that smaller, albeit I think he's like 6'3", so it's not very small, but he's not the mega
like
heavyweight.
235 or some shit.
Yeah, he's not at all small, but we were like, oh yeah, he's smaller heavyweight. It's like how people say Usyk's a smaller guy and he's like 6'3", 230. And you're like, yeah, that's not very small, guys. But with him, I think what's interesting is Damian Knyba has extremely long reach and can punch pretty hard. Yes, he's untested, but I think there is a level of, does this setting a pace thing that Kabayel does this getting on the inside and making, because I think that the true greatness of his style is he makes big men fight at a pace that they don't like fighting. That's like the basic thesis premise is he takes a big fighter and says, you're going to fight at this pace.
He almost fights the way that you'd want, like if Andy Ruiz had been in shape, that's the style you'd want him to fight, because he's got quick hands, he's got really good feet, he closes distance, and he throws in combinations and with a variety that most big men are just not going to be used to. It's part of what made Usyk so difficult for fighters in a very different way. But I think being able to do little man moves in a heavyweight context makes someone very difficult to beat.
I agree. And I also think that, he, like, that's just the basic principle of him, is if he gets on the inside with a bigger fighter, they're kind of screwed, because if he gets inside that reach, he's going to work. He's very comfortable at setting a pace. And it feels like these bigger fighters gas out because he doesn't let them fight at like a pickup basketball pace. Like, it feels like a lot of heavyweight fights. I enjoy the Lumbumba Gonzalez fight against Rivera because the pace is fast, but a lot of fans go, oh, they're so small. And then you watch a heavyweight fight, and sometimes if it's like, mid-level fight, it can look like a hoop game because they want to, 20 shots around. They don't want to exert too much energy. And I think that Kabayel kind of brings a little bit of that flyweight or middleweight pace, where he's putting a lot of punches together and weaponizing, kind of almost like Subriel Matias. He weaponizes a pace on the opponent as much as the damage, and forces guys to fight at that speed. I'm just interested to see how he takes the right hand, because I think Knyba is a guy that's going to land a right hand. And it kind of, there is a chance that he gets clipped. And I think that the more likely interesting fight that could be made that I would like to see is Fabio Wardley versus Kabayel. And I think we both agree that Knyba is a puncher. He's a good puncher. And Wardley's probably the best puncher in heavyweight currently. So I think there is something to look at how a big guy lands punches on him, how it affects. I think
he did get dropped against Zhilei Zhang. He had some difficult rounds early in that fight. The thing that makes him so great is he stays composed and make the adjustment. But I think that Knyba has better conditioning than Zhang. So if he's able to take away from some of what Zhilei was able to do early in the fight, but sustain it, I do think that he has a chance.
To me, I'm just interested to see how, there's some really boring inside boxing take. I'm interested to see how he tries to nullify Knyba's jab, because really this fight comes down to if Knyba can throw at distance, right? And he can get extension on that right hand and keeps you off with the jab or making you thinking. It's a really hard fight for Kabayel. So I want to see the dimensions. I want to see how he works. Does he come out really quick and not let him set? And does he try to get to the middle as quick as possible, so Knyba has to move back to pump a jab? I'm just interested to see some of the subtle nuances in the fight, to see how he pushes that pace, because I think that that's going to really tell us about his composure. Will Anderson said, I think Kabayel will close the distance and get the stoppage, and it might be early. It could be. I'm pretty impressed with Knyba. Yes, this is premature. It's like too early for him to a certain degree, but why not? Kabayel.
It isn't, Bob. Like, he's pushing 30. I think that he's probably wanted to take harder fights than the ones he's getting. And he sees this opportunity to take the number 2 or 3 guy in the division. And it's a fight that puts him in a completely different stratosphere in heavyweight boxing. So I just respect the balls when a guy does something like that.
I think this is a closer fight than people will think. I think it's like a 70-30, 65 type fight. I think there's a real chance that, I think there's two things, right? We learn, and I think we assume, and I think that it's right, we rightly assume Kabayel is a true professional who doesn't overlook opponents, but this is the fight that, like, if you overlook a guy, this is a bad guy to overlook, right? So if you start thinking Usyk or, this is a dangerous one if you start thinking like that. 2, ability to take those shots, because this is a puncher, this is a tall guy. And then the third, which I don't know if I mentioned 3, how do you deal with crazy reach? Because Knyba has at some of the craziest reach. He has a competent coach, a good coach in his corner. They're going to be working on that. There's a lot of questions for me that are going to get answered about Kabayel. And whereas for Knyba, I don't really have questions. It's more so just to see, okay, how do you handle these things I'm looking at?
I think that there's a lot of questions. I mean, we got a lot of respect for Joey Dawejko. Joey Dawejko is not going to make you work at a pace or work at a tempo. He's going to give you an interesting puzzle of a guy that's difficult to hit and sporadically will counterpunch. But there really isn't anything that Knyba's had to deal with in the ring that will prepare him for this moment.
I mean, this is a trial by fire. You got it or you don't. This is what it is, because it's like, this is going to be the Alexis Araiza. Was that her name, or am I thinking of the Araiza? I'm thinking of the old Laker player, where you're having the fight of your life, and you're like, "Whoa, this is going right," or I feel like it's going to be like, "This is going all wrong." I expect
you can also be going the fight of your life, and then you get clocked, and that's not how it goes.
Well, that's why that performance against Bridges was so impressive, right? Because at any moment that fight could have turned into that, and to keep that composure. But I don't think this is going to be a competitive fight. I think someone's going to take control of this fight. More than likely it's Kabayel. But I feel like this is going to be a fight where there's tentative moments, and then someone's going to clearly take over, and there's not going to be an adjustment. And I think that it's going to set the tone for a big year for more than likely Kabayel, who, if Usyk maybe steps away, he's getting to that point where maybe he's going to step away. Kabayel is silently becoming the best guy at heavyweight that no one ever talks about. I think hardcore fight fans talk about him. I think like people that read the hardcore boxing literature and follow shows like ours, but I think there's a lot of US fans that are completely unfamiliar with this guy.
Yeah. Well, and listen, depending on what level of fan you are, you either have no idea the guys he's beaten, or that, stopping Frank Sanchez and Makhmudov and Zhilei Zhang consecutively is an incredibly impressive run that warrants you one of the most dangerous men in heavyweight boxing.
I mean, he's incredible. Our guy, Bipolar Boxing, shout Bipolar. You're doing a great job in the chat today, and we appreciate you being back on the online presence. Kabayel reminds me of Corey Saunders. Decent size, deceptive, quick, and has a good chin. Dakota, you're the big Kabayel guy. What do you think of that?
I got to be honest. I think he's way more of an engine than Corey Saunders. And I didn't see a ton of his fights, but I saw enough of him at a certain level. For me, I think that Kabayel, it's tough to compare him with anybody at heavyweight because it's so rare that you see that kind of engine in a heavyweight.
Just trying to think of a fighter who I'd compare him to, because I think of him as like a workhorse.
The closest comparison I would say is Joe Frazier. I mean, he's just a slightly smaller guy in his era that's able to utilize head movement, footwork, and combination punching to break distance and make guys uncomfortable.
I mean, Frazier, he is. You're going to get a lot of people mad, that Kabayel is the modern Joe Frazier, but that's a great comparison.
I don't know. I stand by that, I think.
Trying to think, like because he has the pressure of Subriel Matias, but he has better defense than Matias. So you can't compare him to Matias. I guess the lazy comparison I'd say is he fights like a smaller fighter and makes heavyweights that don't typically train like smaller fighters have to question their conditioning and ability. And I think that his elite thing is he really wants to win, and he has a deep hunger to win and drive. And he forces guys to question how bad they want to win a fight. Like he puts guys in these positions where he's hitting them with body shots. He's working. I go back to, he reminds me of a pickup basketball player. You play pickup basketball, and then, normally guys play a little off you. You get your jump shot. Maybe you can do your thing because guys, and then you get that one guy who's playing chest to chest D, taking charges. And you're like, who is this guy? I don't want to play at this pace. Like, you're actually wanting to get subbed out of the rec game. You're like, no, I don't want to. This guy's playing full court press on you. You know what I mean? Like, that's the kind of style I think he has, is he's the guy that, like, every play he's playing full court press down the court. Every play he's gonna make you have to work on offense and defense. He's a frustrating guy.
Yeah. One of my favorites to watch right now.
Final thing, because we got to get Dakota out of here. Undercard. There is not a lot to watch on this undercard, at least to me. Galeb Bakashi was one of my favorite Olympians. He's going to be in action. He's always worth watching. But there is a fight that I think Dakota wants to know about. JDR Herrera is fighting for the WBC Interim World Lightweight title. I will talk about that in a second. He's taking on Ricardo Nunes. Nunes most notable for losing to Gervonta Davis in 2019, I believe. It was a Baltimore homecoming. He's taken on a lot of solid guys. Albert Barton. What's the Olympian? Is that the Olympian? Albert Batagazayev, the gold medalist. Zaire Abduliev beat him. Rikishi beat him, the former champion, who's very good fighter. He holds a win over Jezreel Corrales. He holds a win over another notable name too, Alfredo Santiago. He stopped. So he's one of these guys that basically, if you don't have it at a certain level, you're going to lose, right? Even now at this point, if you don't have it. And JDR Herrera, I don't know if you watched him. He's a Cuban fighter that's been based out of the UK. I'm going to be quite honest with you. I don't see it. I'm going to be very honest with you, Dakota. He's a good enough fighter. He could kick my butt. And he's talented to a certain degree. But I'm an old school guy, and a lot of the things that I'm drawn to, I'm not drawn to with him. His hands are low. There's a lot of like flashy things that I just don't think work at elite level boxing. There's a lot of flaws that I see. And to make it even more weird, this fight was ordered for the interim WBC lightweight title. If you remember, that belt was just contested in December when Fulton missed weight, and then Oshaki Foster and Fulton competed. I believe now Foster's back at 130. That whole situation was strange. I don't even know the specifics of that. So then there's a belt on the line that was just contested a month prior, basically. Do you have any opinions on Herrera? Has he even crossed your radar?
Not that I am aware of, actually. And in fact, I would say I have much more experience watching Ricardo Nunes.
And what are your expectations of Nunes in this fight?
Anytime, listen, the couple of times I've seen him, like, he just seems like a guy that takes hard fights, a lot of them, and has mixed results. And so he's just somebody that is in the mix. And if Herrera isn't the real deal, or, does some of those flashy moves that you talk about that don't necessarily apply to high level pro boxing, Nunes is perfectly capable of winning that fight.
Does it scare you that Nunes is coming off a disqualification loss to John Fernandez, who was at one time a top contender?
I don't think so. I think he's one of those guys. He's like a Rene Alvarado type. I don't know that any one individual fight is getting to him that much.
So Herrera's biggest win of his career, according to BoxRec, his 2-star. Are we going to go by the stars on BoxRec? I kind of like going by the stars. So he has a 2-star win over Mark John Yop. His record in 2022 was 30-15. That fight took place in Dubai. Scorecards 97-92, 98-91, 99-91. And then his other one is his last fight in March, which was against Jose Rodolfo Macias Enrique. And that was a TKO 7. And that fighter was 21-3-2. So, he hasn't really fought that next level of opposition, in my opinion. That's the most tested he's been so far.
Well, he's about to get thrown into the deep end, I would say.
And more than likely he passes the test, but it's just like, if he were to win this, what an introduction, right? Because now you're in one of the most compelling divisions with Abdullah Mason and Floyd Schofield and all these young punchers. And, maybe I'm wrong. That's the other thing about me too. Sometimes I watch a real early developmental fight and guys have food poisoning or guys have an off night, they sleep bad and they show up and they don't fight great. And I hold it against them until they get to the world level. And I go, I was wrong. I try to be honest about that. But to me, I never saw him as a sensational breakout guy. And if he goes to that next level, let's say he wins this fight, which I think that he's favored to do so. I mean, all those top name guys that are eager to get in the mix. I mean, this is going to be someone that I think it's going to be very easy for him to get a fight, because I just feel like everybody's going to be like, oh, I'd like to fight this guy, because
everybody wanted to fight Rolly.
Yeah, I think that it's just like this guy. Well, we'll wait and see. But like, I've had questions in my newsletter. People want me to do film study. And it's just, guys that have unorthodox technique, there's two ways it goes. They're the Hall of Fame Prince Nazim, Roy Jones, or they're the guys you've never heard of that suffer a devastating loss because of flawed fundamentals. I don't know which one he is. Maybe he was so good that at the fight that I saw, he just displayed that trait because it was so easy for him. But I can't get over what I once saw.
I love the point, brother.
Okay, so now we're going to do the wrap-up. The wrap-up is Dakota is going to sign off for over a month. You will see him in basically 5 weeks. In 5 weeks, he will be back. Let me see when the Super Bowl is. It might be Super Bowl Sunday. Super Bowl 20.
I believe I will be coming back Super Bowl Sunday.
He's going to be back on Super Bowl Sunday, probably one of our lowest rated shows, to be honest. It's going to be great, so everyone's going to be excited. I don't know. I think I'm going to design some form of Dakota, what stood out from you while you were working and not watching boxing. Like, what fight mattered to you? What was the result you needed to? Which one did you not care about? What surprised you? We might do a little questionnaire to have you fill in the gaps in that time period. But for those, I think that you've made a strong impression for the loyal friends and listeners of this show. Why don't you give them a little send off for at least the time that you won't be here, so they can, they can just get a nice little monologue from you.
Well, first of all, I will see you guys in a couple of weeks. All is temporary. Thank you to everybody that rocked with us for all of 2025. It's such a pleasure doing this show with you every week, my friend. And third co-host, always the chat. We have one of the, if not the best boxing chats in all of the sport. Love hearing from all you guys. Thanks for supporting Lukie. If you read him on Boxing Scene and you follow everything he's doing and you're watching him chop it up with Al Bernstein, I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you if you read what I've been working on in my episodes of The Fight Life this year with Shadeja Green, Price Taylor, Mio Yoshida. There's going to be plenty more of that coming in 2026. And I look forward to all of that and seeing you guys when I come back.
So we got one last one from the Rambler. We got to answer this go by question. Paro is better than Smith anyway. He can throw punches on the move. Smith needs his feet set. I feel like Smith needs a measured pace, and that's his problem. Well, if he needs a measured pace, that's going to be a very hard fight to win, because that's the one thing Subriel Matias is brilliant at disrupting, unless you have one thing. You know what that one thing might be, Dakota?
Power.
If you got power and you can hurt a guy, you can fight at a chill pace.
Smith's got a little power, so I think all of these variables make that an interesting matchup.
It's a very, very interesting matchup. I will be back next week. Bipolar Boxing, have a safe time off. Be looking forward to the return of Dakota. Love the channel, Bipolar Boxing. Thank you, guys. And be sure to go over to Bipolar Boxing's channel. Support him. He's our guy. He's a great supporter. and a member of our community. And in fact, I will say, and Will Anderson said, thanks, Happy New Year. I am keeping Dakota a little too long, but I'll tell a story that kind of warms my heart. You always hear about like the negativity on the internet, but one of the people that tune into I'll call it our community, our podcast, actually reached out to have me reach out to Bipolar Boxing because they actually started listening to his podcast and his shows to make sure he was doing okay. And I think that speaks to the level of community we're bringing, where people are coming in here not to be smarter than other people, not to be better. It's a group of people that love boxing, and we're actually looking out for each other. And there's a level of friendship and there's a level of community. So I'm not trying to put anyone's business out there, but it really warms my heart that rather than people coming in here and being know-it-alls or rubbing it in people's faces, people actually want, the channel to check up on Bipolar Boxing because they enjoy his content from him being in the chat. And I think that really inspires me to keep going with this show.
Beautifully said, my friend.
Well, that's it. We'll be back next week. I don't know who's going to be my co-host, but I'm going to try my hardest to get someone good.
Don't get anyone too cool. Come on, dude.
I gotta do the cool co-host. That's the gimmick. So I will be back next week, and Dakota will be back February 8th, the same day the Super Bowl is played. And Dakota, I will miss talking to you for a while. And for the chat, I will see you next week.
Peace, guys.